This video was made possible thanks to the support from my patrons. Pledge today and you can be involved in what videos get made next, and also get early access to them. Link in the description. Finally, after months of acting as producer and script editor for several serials, Innes Lloyd and Gerry Davis could finally start making headway with their plans to renew Doctor Who, after overseeing a run of serials that they were unhappy with, and episodes that did not seem to be resonating with audiences anymore. Season 3 of Doctor Who definitely has its fans, but spring 1966 was seen as the final days of the programme as far as the media was concerned. Doctor Who had been on the air for a few years now, and the consensus was that it was starting to feel played out, and the time had come to end it. It's with this in mind that Lloyd and Davis wanted to axe the unpopular historicals and start modernising the show on multiple fronts. The first step for this was for Davis to start interviewing multiple scientists to act as a consultant on Doctor Who, in order to have their finger on the pulse of modern science, but also trying to find someone who wasn't so fixated on the details that it would prevent good television. Davis recalled his time writing for the football drama United, and their hiring of Jimmy Hill, former player turned Coventry City manager, to act as a consultant. But Hill was often strict and once stopped the filming of a scene because of the type of hat one of the actors was wearing. Davis wanted a scientist who also loved science fiction. Enter Kit Pedler, a scientist working at the University of London, who was also a big sci-fi fan. Not only did he grow up enjoying the comic strip exploits of space heroes like Dan Dare, but he and his family would sit down and watch Doctor Who every Saturday night. Gerry Davis took a meeting with Kit Pedler, and here's what happened in Davis's own words.
Innes and I thought we'd start Kit off by giving him a story to do. And we were sitting in the office one day and looked out the window and saw the post office tower. And I said to Kit, what would happen if? And somehow some magic happened and we suddenly found our minds move together. And I said, well, could something dominate the city from there because it's the tallest structure in London? And he said, well, it would have to be a computer. And I said, that's interesting, but how would it get around? Oh, it would have to have a control network of sorts, possibly using the telephones. And eventually we thought about the telephones and pillar boxes, and we'd have all the kids so scared they wouldn't post a letter or pick up the telephone. Then we thought, because a computer is stationary, it would have to impose its power upon people to get them to make war machines, which would then go out onto the streets and be capable of dominating the city. And that's how the computer would take over. All that came in one meeting.
With a story now in mind, Pedler was immediately hired as Doctor Who's new scientific advisor, and writer Ian Stuart Black, fresh off the typewriter from The Savages, was commissioned to pen the script. Originally called The Computers, then changed to The War Machines, making Ian Stuart Black the first writer in Doctor Who history to pen back-to-back serials. There's a lot unique about The War Machines, with its opening title cards, the first story since Planet of Giants to take place on contemporary Earth, and so much more. But before we can dive into all of that, let me back up. The War Machines opens with the Doctor and companion Dodo arriving in London 1966. It's been around a year since Dodo had been abducted, I mean recruited, so she's surprised to see the brand new post office tower fully built, the tallest building in London. Inside houses a new supercomputer created by Professor Brett, played by John Harvey, that's 10 years ahead of its time, called Will Operating Thought Analog, or Votan for short. Now, it's spelt Wotan, as in W-O-T-A-N, and it's meant to be based off the god Odin, who was also called Wotan, but I'm certain I hear everyone in the story pronounce it Votan, like with a V, so I'm just gonna stick with that. Let me know in the comment section if I've gone insane. Votan is due to be connected to other major computers in the coming days to make complex decisions with no political bias and an emphasis on the facts, but it appears that Votan has one fact on its mind. the inferiority of humans, and it starts hypnotizing London citizens through the phone lines to start assembling a machine army for total conquest. One of its mind-controlled victims is Dodo, but the Doctor finds help in Brett's secretary, Polly, played by Anneke Wills, and shore-leaved sailor Ben, played by Michael Craze. The Doctor, Ben, and Polly must figure out a way to stop Votan and shut down the war machines before London can fall to their might. The first thing that stood out with the War Machines, apart from the aforementioned title cards, which aren't a new thing to the show, see The Massacre, but remember, this is the first serial after introducing the format change of the stories with a unified title, so they were clearly experimenting here. But what stood out was the breakneck pace. The Doctor and Dodo land in London, spot the post office tower, the Doctor can sense something is wrong, so he and Dodo just waltz into the place, and they're let inside to see Votan and meet Professor Brett with no questions asked. Now, this approach has its pros and cons. Obviously, it's good to just cut right to the chase, but obviously there's a credibility issue here. And it mainly stands out because, well, the Doctor and his companions having to earn the trust of the supporting cast is an established, almost ironclad part of the Doctor Who formula at this point. The group arrive in Tombstone and they have to report to the sheriff with their cover story. They land on the Savages planet and the Elders already know who they are because they get BBC One on their TV or something, and countless other variations of the first act. But in the War Machines, the Doctor just marches into this newly built post office tower like he owns the place, and Brett just tells him and his supposed secretary Dodo everything about his secret computer project. Though the Target novelization would rectify this issue with Professor Brett trusting the Doctor because, explaining, "I've heard Ian Chesterton speak of you often. I suppose you are the Doctor he used to quote, a great expert in computers." But I think this just exemplifies the impending change in format for Doctor Who generally, as you can call the War Machines essentially the end of Phase 1 of Doctor Who. The start of the show had the Doctor, Susan, Ian and Barbara wandering the universe trying to get home to modern London. It was the defined end state of the show, though obviously much less so when Ian and Barbara left in the chase to plot their own course home. The Doctor's inability to land on modern Earth has allowed Doctor Who to just chart its own path and do its own thing outside of the broader cultural context of the 1960s, which was, for all intents and purposes, a pretty revolutionary decade for the United Kingdom. The world the Doctor was born into in 1963 was way different to 1966, and I'm not just talking about the post office tower in London. The first wave of baby boomers born after World War II were becoming adults now, and that generational shift can be found from the music scene, thanks to the Beatles, to sport with the England football team just 2 weeks away from winning the World Cup, who weren't just seen as great sportsmen, but a positive symbol of British youth. If Doctor Who was going to return to Earth and it wasn't going to be an endgame for the show, it was going to have to adapt to this shifting paradigm, which even included the TV shows that had become so popular in the mid-1960s. We've got Coronation Street, with a quiet bar watching actual newsreader Kenneth Kendall inform the citizens of the War Machine menace, shots of the Doctor on the streets of London, framing him like Professor Quatermass has stumbled into an episode of The Avengers. Heck, Anneke Wills was a guest star on The Avengers a few years previous. There's a few scenes in parts 1 and 2 that take place in a nightclub in Covent Garden called the Inferno Club, and it's clearly been laid out to look like the set of Ready Steady Go. Watch the Doctor stride down that staircase acting like he's one of the hip youngsters.
He looks like that disc jockey.
Oh, and this is apparently a reference to Jimmy Savile. The 1960s weren't all good times. Anyway, in short, the Doctor left London, England, Earth in 1963 and returned to it 3 years later, and he might as well be on a new planet entirely. His return of the police telephone box to Earth is not the end of the show, but rather a new era for him to explore. But unfortunately, that also means he needs a new set of hip, modern companions, a replacement duo for Stephen and Dodo, who are so right now that they're practically tomorrow. Enter Ben and Polly. Quite a few actors did audition for the two, including Fraser Hines and Deborah Watling, but we'll be seeing those two again in a few months' time. With Polly, we've got a young optimist who works as Professor Brett's secretary and knows the best nightclubs in town, and with Ben, we've got a working class sailor. On paper, a good combination, and Ben in particular is actually a bit of an outlier for the classic series, actually being a working class companion with a regional accent. The only real contradiction with him is referring to the Doctor as Sir, but he is a military man after all, one who volunteers to engineer a trap for Votan in Part 4 because he's younger and faster than the Doctor, a far cry from the argumentative Ian and Stephen. He's a youngster of the 60s, but we can't have him be too anti-authority, this is the BBC. And Anneke Wills, well, she was the newly wedded wife of actor Michael Gough, who has said that he enjoyed his time as the Celestial Toymaker so much that he convinced Anneke to audition for the new companion role. But that leaves Dodo in a thankless position, which is a shame because, and I know how this sounds, but parts 1 and 2 of The War Machines, her final 2 episodes, is when Jackie Lane puts in her best work, even from the opening scene where the Doctor and Dodo arrive in London and Hartnell fumbles his line, saying he can scent something from the post office tower instead of saying sense, and Jackie Lane just runs with it.
You know, there's something alien about that tower. I can scent it.
Smells okay to me. Good old London smoke.
I can feel it's got something sort of powerful.
Genuinely stellar improv skills there. She also sells the gravity of Votan's knowledge when her and the Doctor give it difficult questions to answer to see if it really is as all-knowing as Brett says it is.
Here's one you'll never get. What does the word TARDIS mean? Doctor?
Well, what does it say, my dear?
Got it right. Time and relative dimensions in space.
Good heavens, let me see.
That's actually really cool, and pretty creepy for an audience. Votan knows what those initials mean with no knowledge or context given, though how it knows that is never explained and this is never built upon. Votan knows about the TARDIS, but seems to think the Doctor is human?
There is one special human brain that Votan needs.
Anyway, back to Dodo. Votan has decided to take over the world, and needs the influence of the Doctor. It's able to control and hypnotize people within close proximity to do its bidding, but for people further away, it uses the phone lines. Dodo takes a call when she's at a nightclub, and the ending cliffhanger for Part 1 reveals that Votan has taken control of 3 humans, with a 4th about to arrive.
Someone is coming. The 4th member, called here to receive orders. The Doctor's secretary.
What are my instructions?
He said it!
Yes, throughout the story, Votan refers to the Doctor as Doctor Who. I have no idea why, but I can't argue with it because Votan is apparently an actual actor in the episode. You see, Votan has its own credit at the end. But I love this cliffhanger, from the way it's filmed and the frame composition. It's so cool, and the idea of the Doctor's companion betraying them is one hell of a final note for a regular cast member. And Jackie Lane is genuinely really good as hypnotized Dodo. In Part 2, I always found my eyes drawn to her throughout, and watching her in the background trying to push and guide the Doctor in the best position for Votan. Now, it's not confirmed in the text itself, but I do think that the Doctor senses something is wrong with Dodo, even if he doesn't know the full extent, and the story gets some great mileage out of the hypnotized Votan slaves. There's a really creepy scene in Part 2 where a bunch of slaves in a Covent Garden warehouse are building the war machines and testing out the weaponry. To do this, they use live test subjects who the machine just kills as others oversee the operation. That's really creepy for grown-ups.
You there. Stay where you are. Stand still. Bearing 52. Distance check 30 feet. Elevation 5 feet. Impact fatal. Take aim. Ready to proceed. Observe results. About to fire. Fire! Test satisfactory. Effective at 30 feet.
And there's a great misdirect as well in parts 2 and 3, so the audience know full well that Dodo has been hypnotised, that's explicit, but in part 2, the Doctor and Dodo are staying at Charles Summers' house, a civil servant who is involved in the Votan project. His secretary is ill, so Polly comes to replace her for the day after being sent by Brett. But how did Brett know about the illness? Okay, questions for later. Anyway, so while the audience is focused on Dodo's infiltration, we completely forget about Polly's random appearance. Ben finds a war machine in the warehouse and tries to escape, only to stumble across Polly on the way out.
Have you gone mad? What are you doing? For Pete's sake, Polly, open it!
I have my instructions.
Polly, what's happened to you?
You are not to escape.
Yep, Polly has also been brainwashed, specifically with bourgeois talking points.
Okay, Ducks.
Why do you speak?
Well, look at you, you're nearly on the ground.
I'm very well. I am happy to work for the success of the machines.
Incidentally, Polly is able to resist the mind control because of her friendship with Ben, which results in this genuinely tense moment where Ben finds a way to escape the warehouse, but Polly catches him in the act, and she just glares at him and lets him go. These close-ups are so tense and it's acted so well, there's so much ambiguity to it. Once again, this is a new feel for Doctor Who. Even from the close-ups when Dodo is being deprogrammed by the Doctor and the extensive location work outside, director Michael Ferguson had been directing BBC TV dramas for several years at this point, like Z Cars, Compact, The Newcomers and more, so this ambitious story was in very safe hands. Anyway, I was talking about Dodo, wasn't I? I guess that's the issue with writing these reviews like a stream of consciousness, but it's also indicative of how Dodo just disappears from the story. You see, Dodo is rumbled, and the Doctor is able to use the ring on his finger to deprogram her. She's then sent to Charles's house in the country to recover, and then she is never seen again. The story ends with Polly just telling the Doctor that Dodo is not coming with him.
Sir Charles has been looking for you everywhere. We've got a message from him about Dodo.
Oh, yes, I've been waiting around here for her. Where is she? I very nearly left without her.
Left?
Yes, to the airport, yes. She is well, I hope.
She says she's feeling much better and she'd like to stay here in London, and she sent you her love.
Her love? Huh. There's gratitude for her. Take her all the way around the world, through space and time.
Come again, Doctor.
What? Oh, nothing, my boy, nothing.
And that's it. That's Dodo's departure, as in, she doesn't get one. Yes, it's a massive high for her character to get that part 1 cliffhanger and those brainwashed scenes with the Doctor, but this is probably the worst companion departure in Doctor Who history. Now, Jackie Lane was concerned about getting typecast already, and Innes Lloyd let Jackie know that this wasn't personal, it was just bad timing because they needed to reinvent the show. But there had to be a better way, right? Especially with the Doctor scoffing at how ungrateful she apparently is. Yeah, there's an issue with companions leaving the show because they fall in love with a stranger, and a few other departures that I can critique, but Dodo's departure is on another level. But we'll talk more about Dodo's legacy when compared to more modern sci-fi mad computer stories like The Terminator, but we have to remember that the internet was not a thing at this point, so while a computer having to rely on the landline phone networks to communicate and exert its influence feels basic, it probably was one of the more practical and realistic ways for something like Votan to take control in the mid-1960s. However, that's where the credibility for this plot begins and ends, because while The War Machines has good characters, compelling performances, and a brilliant feel to it, the actual plot itself was so sloppy I was wearing a towel for all 4 parts. Firstly, Votan's plan doesn't even need to happen. In 4 days' time, C-Day will take place, and that's the day Votan will be linked up with all of the other important computer systems in the world.
C-Day, that is Computer Day, will be next Monday, July the 16th, that is in 4 days' time. Now, on that date, all the computer systems in this country and subsequently in the whole world will come under the control of this central computer, which we call Votan. Now, as you've heard, that will have both peaceful and military implications. I need hardly tell you that this is a great step forward for Britain, and indeed, I may say, for the whole world.
So with that in mind, why does Votan decide to start its world domination plans now? Yeah, take control of some humans and lay some groundwork, but Votan says over and over again that Doctor Who is required. But why? What does it intend to do with him? And if it thinks that humans are so necessary to wipe out or to its plans? Then we get the time frame. Here's the timeline of the first 2 episodes. So the Doctor and Dodo arrive in the afternoon on day 1, learn about Votan, and that evening there's a press briefing about C-Day. While the Doctor is at that press event, Dodo goes to the nightclub with Polly, meets Ben, and Dodo gets hypnotized along with the first group of scientists, and they leave to scheme. After the conference, still on day 1, the Doctor returns to the nightclub, Dodo comes back, and then everyone goes home in a taxi that night. During the taxi departure, we meet a homeless man who sleeps in a warehouse, but finds that it has now been turned overnight into a fully industrial operation with dozens of brainwashed staff and even Votan branded boxes full of supplies to build war machines. This has happened over the course of just a few hours. The homeless man is killed and his body is found that same night, with his death making the morning papers on day 2. God, I wonder who decided to stop the presses in the early hours of the morning on that one. Like I said at the beginning with the Doctor just walking into the post office tower, it helps with the pacing and it trims all the fat, but it really hurts the credibility. We're even given a random ticking clock where Votan's invasion is going to take place at noon the next day. Why so fast? And once again, why not wait until C-Day? It's because Votan jumped the gun and created that assembly line in Covent Garden that the Doctor and the military learned that it was sentient and knew what it was doing. Also, why is Votan so inconsistent with how it communicates? In scenes, it swaps between printing out instructions and telepathically talking to its subjects.
Here are your orders. Timeless Votan will decide on the future of the human race. Who shall live to serve the machines and who shall be eliminated? Crimson, you take that.
London is the first capital to be taken over. Then Washington and Moscow. War machines must be built immediately.
Further instructions from Votan. We shall require skilled labor. A labor corps will come into operation immediately.
And sometimes it just speaks to them normally.
Top priority is to enlist Doctor Who. He has advanced knowledge which Votan needs. Doctor Who must be enlisted into our services tonight.
Pick a lane, Votan. Now, the performances of the hypnotized actors are effective, but unfortunately, with the exception of the emphasis on Polly, they do get sidelined as the story progresses by the titular war machines themselves, which, to be fair, are pretty cool designs as 1960s TV goes, wholly impractical, incredibly slow, and with an arm which acts more as a hammer than anything else. These machines of death are so vicious and so monstrous that they even have cute eyes near the top of them. They are so dangerous that the most we see them do is fire jets of gas, much like the Peter Cushing Daleks, and also run over boxes. Many, many times. Don't get me wrong, if I saw this thing heading towards me on an empty London street, I would probably turn the other way and walk off. I wouldn't run, I wouldn't need to, I'd just walk. But I think the production team were punching above their weight here. Giving Votan some sort of physical form through these machines seems to lessen its power, if that makes sense. Why would a computer that can hypnotize people through the phone lines or by just being near them need war machines, if that makes sense? I do love these things, but come on, this looks like something I'd see in an early episode of Robot Wars.
From London 1966, Votan.
Weighing in at 100 kilos, this four-wheel drive war machine is powered by a used car battery. It's got powerful arms that can push boxes, but I'm worried about its lack of speed and pitiful weaponry. At one point, a war machine has to push a dead body out of the way, but it clearly doesn't have the power to do that, so it just bumps into the actor, and he has to roll over out of shot. It's very funny, but I think it's only very funny to me. In part 4, a war machine is given instructions by Votan, and it just looks like it decides to do its own thing. It destroys the radio and kills one of the scientists for basically no reason.
It's gone rogue!
I don't know why it does this. Maybe it just hated what it was hearing on the airwaves?
Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns!
Whatever its motive, it goes out onto the streets of London, and the Doctor, with the help of Ben and the military, is able to deactivate it with a magnetic field. The Doctor then reprograms it so it can go to the post office tower, and destroy Votan. How a machine with no opposable digits was able to operate the lift to the top floor, scratch that, how it was able to even get in the lift, is a story for another time. Maybe a Big Finish sequel 60 years later, I don't know. I do like the Doctor turning the war machine against Votan. It's the first time in quite a while that I felt like the Doctor was a man of science rather than just a smart and whimsical traveller. Unfortunately, this approach to the character wasn't something that William Hartnell was fond of, with him preferring the Doctor to be a more magical hero for the children at home, rather than just focusing on his technical know-how and scientific knowledge. But credit to Hartnell, he does commit to this aspect of the character, and he doesn't let on in his performance that he's not on board with the interpretation. Behind the scenes, he wasn't really happy with the show at this moment due to the sudden departure of Jackie Lane in this serial and trying to adjust to his new supporting cast members. He was also quite physically frail, coming towards the end of his 3rd year of filming Doctor Who, a very intense and demanding job for someone of his age. But I actually think he's really good in the War Machines. Great, in fact. There's some terrific comedy moments, like when he's talking to Professor Brett about his new machine.
Are you seriously telling me, sir, that you have invented a machine that can think?
Yes.
And never makes mistakes?
Never.
Part of me thinks that he just forgot his next line, but that's very funny to me. The scene at Charles's office is great, partly because the camera can move in very close to the actors, and we can see Hartnell truly acting and being able to emote to his own camera. It's really great, but the standout is the Doctor's reaction to Votan trying to take control of him through the phone.
Yes, I think I remember. I was speaking to Professor Brett, and all of a sudden there seemed to be an explosion. It very nearly knocked me off my feet. It was as if...
What, Doctor?
It was as if something enormous and terrific was trying to absorb me. Yes, it's ridiculous, Charles, isn't it? Yes, there's something radically wrong with that telephone, yes.
It's an incredible performance where there's this mixture of terror and awe. I don't think we've ever seen the Doctor react like this to, well, anything. It's so enthusiastic and character revealing. No wonder that Hartnell has a revitalized sense of energy in this serial, like how he teases a crippled war machine in part 4.
Temper.
But the most well-remembered moment comes at the end of part 3. The war machine in Covent Garden has broken free of the warehouse. It's fighting off soldiers in the back alley, where it's somehow managed to disable their weaponry. The soldiers have no means of stopping it, so Ben and the soldiers fall back. But the Doctor stands his ground. Likely because Hartnell was not physically fit enough to run away, but let's not spoil the moment. He stands up tall and faces the war machine that's rolling towards him. iconic. So the Doctor manages to stop the War Machines, during which he drops his TARDIS key so that Ben and Polly can meet him later to return it, and they use it to sneak inside the TARDIS as it dematerializes to parts unknown. And that's the War Machines. And no, I was not joking about Dodo earlier. She really does just get possessed and disappear midway through the serial. Anyway, The War Machines is a really great looking and sounding story. One thing I didn't really touch on was the music, which is really effective throughout. I dig how abstract it gets at times. Sometimes it sounds like a phone dial-up tone, very fittingly. The issues mainly come with the broad strokes of the story. Dodo's departure, while very effectively set up with her brainwashed betrayal, just does the character and the story no favours by dropping her halfway through to make way for the new companions. Ben and Polly do make a good first impression here, but you can kind of see the inner workings of Doctor Who as a TV show. Like, well, these are the new companions now, dear viewer. The logistics don't hold up, the structure sometimes moves too fast for the sake of the story, and the War Machines themselves are charming, but very much a product of its time. But The War Machines is a serial with spectacular moments. Some great Doctor showcase scenes, with Hartnell possibly finding his last second wind in his final days as the character. Polly and Dodo's possessions are creepy and well portrayed, the outdoor London scenes are a great change of pace, and like I said, I just love the feel of the story. It's so entertaining and it moves too fast for you to be bored by it. I'm not sure if it stands up as its own 4-part serial, but as a proving ground for what Doctor Who could become in the future, I think it's an undeniable success. The War Machines and Votan would not be a successor to the Daleks despite their tank-like appearance and their smoke-blowing weaponry, but they have left a mild imprint on the wider Doctor Who universe. A sequel to this serial was done years later by Big Finish Productions in a Torchwood 1 prequel box set, where Yvonne Hartman and Ianto Jones have a run-in with a returning Votan in London 40 years later.
Yvonne Hartman.
Hello, Julian. You found a gun in my drawer, I see.
Over here. Now.
Of course. I know it's not really Julian. Not anymore.
Open it.
Fool me once, eh? How did you and Fiona get along? I'd hate to play gooseberry. She's very quiet. I suspect you prefer that in a woman.
Silence.
See?
Yvonne Hartman is required.
Just Yvonne Votan. Can I call you Will?
You will serve me. You will serve Votan.
Incredible. It installed itself in your head. Took over completely and you didn't even know.
The Julian Delaware subroutine served its purpose for human interaction. It became inefficient.
I suppose our brains run on electrical signals, much like a computer, but still...
Unlock this terminal. Open the file store. Votan will assume control of the manufacture of the War Machines.
I'm afraid you really will have to cut off my fingers before I allow that.
Votan says that arrangement is acceptable.
And we later learn in Series 13 of the show's revival, during the origin story of UNIT in Survival of the Flux, that this incident was one of the motivating events that spurred on the creation of the organisation.
That's our new corporal. Brought him in after we missed the whole thing at the post office tower.
But this gets the dates wrong. Lethbridge Stewart was not a corporal in this year. He was a colonel in the events of the Web of Fear, which takes place 2 years after the War Machines.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
As for Dodo, well, the expanded material was not kind to the character, with a lot of it written by fans who bought into the interpretation that she was just a failed companion and really leaned into that angle in quite mean-spirited ways. The expanded universe canon had Dodo lose her memories as a result of her hypnosis at the hands of Votan, so she could not explain to the police where she'd been for the year that she was supposedly missing. And, as outlined in the book Who Killed Kennedy by David Bishop and James Stephens, Dodo would have visions of memories of her adventures throughout time and space, which wound up with her being institutionalized, and honestly from then on it gets needlessly violent and morbid, so I won't dive into it here. Now, attempts have been made in recent years to rewrite Dodo's fate. She was at companion Sarah Jane Smith's funeral in the Farewell Sarah Jane epilogue, but perhaps most notably is that Big Finish Productions has been telling stories of the period between the Savages and the War Machines, where Dodo was the Doctor's only companion. Played by actor Lauren Cornelius, Dodo is getting a full-blown redemption in the expanded universe, opposite Stephen Noonan as the First Doctor, with a collection of back-to-basic stories which take her to 2020's London, 13th century Lincoln, and coastal England after the Second World War.
We're not lost, are we?
My dear, I'm never lost.
Never. Doctor, the TARDIS has never once landed where you've wanted.
Oh, nonsense. I've never heard such rubbish.
How big a margin?
Have you ever noticed how we always land on planets?
Yes.
Well, the universe is only 30% matter, and most of that is, hydrogen in interstellar space. So, quite frankly, it's a...
Well, when you put it like that...
Although I will admit, a lot of these trees do look the same.
After leaving Doctor Who, Jackie Lane retired from acting and had a pretty eclectic run of jobs, working as an au pair, a diplomatic secretary in Paris, France, and even ran an antique shop, before settling as an agent in London management, representing actors such as Tom Baker and Janet Fielding. She rarely attended conventions or did interviews or commentaries regarding her Doctor Who stories, but she did partake in Doctor Who themed charity work and even appeared at the Doctor Who Live after party for the show's 50th anniversary. Jackie Lane passed away in June 2021 at the age of 79. After the broadcast of The War Machines, Doctor Who would be taking an 8-week break off the airwaves, effectively making this the end of the show's 3rd season. With Season 4, an even bigger change is around the corner, as we come to William Hartnell's penultimate story as the Doctor, in his first adventure with newcomers Ben and Polly. After wanting to change the format of the show and get rid of historicals, Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davis would open the season with a pirate-themed historical. I don't get it either. But anyway, join us next time for an adventure on the Cornish coast, as the TARDIS takes the trio to the 17th century on the search for treasure in The Smugglers. I'll see you next time. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching my review of Doctor Who The War Machines. Next up is The Smugglers, and that will end the Hartnell review marathon in terms of the classic series reviews. And I feel like the 11th Doctor and the Angels Take Manhattan, I just want to rip out the last page and not do that review, because that means that it'll be the end of the marathon, and that will be quite sad. Now, there's one detail in this review that I didn't really touch on, and that was how the War Machine story got assembled from disparate parts because of censored clips in Australia and things like that. I didn't really want to bog down the pacing of the review with an in-depth explanation on that, but it is a pretty fascinating story. I will point you folks in the direction of other sources who talk about how the War Machines was assembled, so it was saved. It could have been a missing story. Check out either the Missing Episodes podcast, they've done an episode on the War Machines, or check out the 2008 official To Entertain DVD release, which has got a special feature on the reassembling of the War Machines. But anyway, as usual, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already to keep up to date with future Doctor Who reviews. Leave any comment down below to appease the almighty algorithm. You can also become a patron of this channel as well to help to support it financially, to help to keep the lights on here. I'd like to give a shout out to these particular patrons: Adam Grattan, Ben Langdon, Callum Baird, Chiba City Blues, Dan the Dreamer Shill, Daniel Davis, Darren Carver-Bausiger, Dean Jones, Dylan Whitaker, Air Who Even, Ginger Animator, Jack D. Evans, Joseph Adams, Lard Dragon Ezra, Leela, Maria Bergman, Marianne Mogensen, Mario Fanboy 15, Michael Serrano, Miranda Logan, Nick M, Palex, Pat Andrews, Randall Sprinkle, Raven Woods, Reese Lloyd, Ross, Ryan Duncan, Sam Montgomery, Samuel Whitaker, Samuel Davis, Sarah Parker Shemelt, The Evil Dalek, The Brit Sniper, Toby Loxton, and Will. Thanks so much to all of my patrons. Don't forget, if you want to be on that list of names, you can support me. Links in the description below. And I'll see you folks next time for the thrilling conclusion for The Smugglers. See you next time.